I'd like to start a sitcom with this group. Can we do that?
I'll be the cute girl.
Your cast, absolutely. So it feels like, you know, from my perspective, at least on television, that family sitcoms have had a renaissance, thanks in part to some of the people on this panel right now. Why do you think that's happening right now? Natch, do you want to start?
Sure. Whoa. Hi. Why do I think that's happening? I just think that, for me, I think it's probably tied to the different platforms that are now available, you know, breaking away from even, you know, the 4 networks, then basic cable, then pay cable, and there's just so much need for new content that I think that there are more opportunities for people to sort of come at it from like an outsider perspective, you know what I mean? And sort of not the typical stuff that you've been seeing, you know, that's what I think. Thank you. Great start.
Thank you. David, what about you? You've certainly been able to push the boundaries of what's, you know, on broadcast cable, on broadcast television.
I feel like we're coming back to that, what is familiar and what is comfortable. I think in the last 10 years, I love that how television has gone out there and tried new things, and we're sort of coming back to, you know, these family shows like Phil's show, like all of Norman's shows that really are reminiscent of our own families, but we're able to also bring in the new way that people are making television and pushing those boundaries more. You know, it's really fun on my show. I love being able to be able to do both. I think it's, you know, sort of the comfortableness of and familiarity of those family shows.
You're going to shoot season 2 on your iPhone, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Like the whole thing.
Yeah.
That's what I heard, yeah.
Mr. Lear, I know you visited the set of Blackish this year.
Why am I not Norman?
Because I'm in awe right now. I'm just trying to remain calm and form complete sentences.
Let's not carry this age thing too far.
Okay, thank you. I know you visited the set of Blackish this year. Can you talk about that experience?
I'm sorry, say again?
I know you visited the set of Blackish this year. Can you talk about that experience?
I love Kenya and I love the show. But I've also visited Carmichael and enjoyed that too. I love live actors working with a live audience. There's just not like, it's theater, and the writing and the acting and the audience, you know, it's riding the emotions of all 3 elements, and I love them. And those shows are all in front of live audiences.
It seems like modern TV has sort of moved away from live audiences, or, you know, we can talk about the multicam versus single cam. Can you all weigh in on how you feel about that?
Go, Phil.
It all starts with him. This was my biggest influence as a kid. I was watching All in the Family and understanding that this was like theater, and if content and character is strong enough, you don't have to move around. You don't have to go to the car and then another car and then the bathroom and then the coffee shop and then the airport and then the airplane, and then, you know, I call that the illusion of entertainment, where at the end of 20 minutes so many things flashed in front of your eyes, so many sets and costumes and hairstyles and things that you thought you were entertained. But when you watched All in the Family, for example, you were sucked in by the character and the content. They didn't move. They stayed in the 2 chairs the whole time, right? And it went very quickly, and you remembered every second of it. So
I could hear him all day.
And so, you know, it's like having a great conversation with someone that you really like. The time goes quickly, right? And if they're saying important things and maybe you're learning a thing or two, it becomes, you know, indelible. So that was just, I can't say one kind of thing is better than, no, let's say it. It's better.
I'd like to weigh in for just a moment. I mean, that was my early training, was in half-hour live, not live, but it felt live. And I think what's interesting when you develop a show that way is each week it is like working on a little theater piece, because you're in rehearsal and you go through the run-through and then you rewrite, and it's tremendous training, I think, for writers. And I think it shows you sort of what's gold and what stays, even though, you know, the 3rd day out it doesn't seem funny to you, but you kind of know it will work. And I think it helps. I I think it helps writers develop that kind of instinct for comedy. And then to hear it in the audience, and then it's a wonderful training ground. And yes, the immediacy of having the audience, there's nothing like that. That energy that it gives to the actors, it's very, very special.
Do you then rewrite on the fly if something's not working in front of the live audience?
Absolutely. I remember when I started, you would rewrite at the dinner hour. Everyone would have dinner, and then they'd bring in a new audience, and you better have some jokes ready for the new audience, or you're sort of in trouble. So, yeah, you did. You learned to sort of produce rapidly and not be too precious about it. And a large part of television, and particularly that style, is producing under pressure and just keeping, just doing it. So it's tremendous training for writers, directors, and everyone. And I can't imagine what it must have been in live television, because that felt very, tense already, in a good way. I think people who like this kind of would like to be, have sort of an energy thing where they. Everyone was in this together. Let's do this. So,
how topical can you get? How far could you feel like you can push the boundaries when you're doing live television?
I mean, live television, like I think that it just depends when your production cycle is. Like South Park is amazing in how timely they're able to be, especially with animation. So. But they work around the clock for nonstop for weeks at a time and months at a time to get there, to make sure that they're the most current they can be. So I think, it just depends on when you want to air, when you shoot stuff. I mean, like we were talking about Netflix now, you do all 13 and put them all up together. So it's like, I think probably, as you're airing, as stuff is happening in the news, like with this election year, I think a lot of the fall shows will come out and sort of start dealing with, the timing is going to work out that way, I think.
Norman, did you ever have to change something in the show because by the time you aired it, the topical thing you had mentioned had changed somehow?
No, I don't remember that happening. Because we made a show in March and it was on before April ended.
Right.
And, we weren't that far ahead. Now we're doing a new version of One Day at a Time, a Cuban-American version of One Day at a Time. We're making all 13 before the first one airs. That's a brand new experience. So we won't learn whatever it was we learned from a live national audience, what they appreciated.
So are you avoiding topical?
Not at all. But, topical for me is, what the juice of life. It's always topical. People are always saying to me, nothing's changed. All in the Family, where everything we ever did would work today and does work today for the people who are seeing it, for the first time, all these years later. Because we were dealing largely with problems that are eternal. They don't go away. They're human.
Trump.
I view Donald Trump as the middle finger of the American right hand. And it's the American people saying, this is the kind of leadership you give us.
Nice setup.
That almost sounds like pro-Trump, I have to say.
So given that, given the way that Netflix is working, are you going to be able to work your politics or your point of view into the shows that you're writing now?
Well, I'm learning a great deal, too, because one of the showrunners is herself, of course, a Cuban-American. So we are dealing, they're human, though. They're the same problems we dealt with years ago, but they come out of the Latin experience. So I'm learning a great deal as we go along, too, and it's great. And it's everyday problems, which were as much with us and as true 40 years ago as today. We don't change a lot, we humans.
Absolutely. What's amazing to me to watch is now it feels like the subjects of diversity that you were talking about 40 years ago are now finally coming back and we're able to talk about them now. You were at the forefront of that. Why do you think it took us 40 years to be able to come back and kind of have these conversations again?
Well, I think, the proliferation of stations and cable stations and so forth. This is the moment. This is the golden age. Because it's the moment we're experiencing it. Like this moment, it took you, all of you, every split second of your lives, just to get here to look at, look, you're all looking in this direction. You just heard me say the word direction. You never heard me say it before. And you spent every split second of your life just to hear me say direction. So this is the moment.
I'm satisfied. I feel like I've made right choices in life to get me right here, to hear you say that, all that.
So getting back to the subject of family, so how do you go about creating a TV family? Is it about chemistry when it comes to casting?
Money. They don't come otherwise. It is chemistry. It is. And all the planets have to line up for these things to be right. When you think about, let's say, Norman shows, any of our shows, you think of the cast that you like, you take one person out that's maybe not the same show anymore. Right? So that's it's like the way your family works. And by the way, every TV show, regardless of genre, I mean a news show, I mean a cop show, every show is about a family.
Absolutely.
So this is just a, kind of a metaphor for all the shows that you love, all the things that you watch on TV. It's the Today Show. That's a family of people you like being with in the morning. You have your coffee.
There's a family on the air, and then there's a family of people who make it.
Exactly. And they have to have chemistry too.
It is always such a special thing because, as writers, you sit in a dark room by yourself and create this family that you hope is going to come across the way you want to. But if you don't, like Phil was saying, if you don't have that cast, if you're missing one person, it all could fall apart. But when it does all come together, I mean, their shows, our show, we have this amazing cast that then takes what we've written and makes it so much better. And that, for me, that's the most satisfying thing, is writing something and then giving it to someone else who then makes it better. And I'm always shocked when that happens and so pleased and I always just feel so honored that an actor understands what we're trying to do and then takes it and makes it their own.
And then brings it to life.
Yeah.
It's just words on paper until that, the miracle of that is forever a miracle for me too.
And we were talking, David and I, because we are single camera shows, we don't get that audience feedback and, so for us it's really the table read where, as the writer in the writer's room, you're working, you think something's gonna work in theory, it's making you guys laugh, and then when you hear the cast read it, it either comes to life and it sings and people are reacting the way you want, or it just falls flat and you're like, this is not at all funny. Like,
and then you want to kill yourself.
And you want to kill yourself, yeah. It's a rough Tuesday at that point.
But then it could work on camera. It can work because you're making movies every week. Yeah. It is a different form.
Yeah. And what you were saying, Phil, about that the people who make the show are also a family. My writing partner is in the audience, Brenda Lilly, and
where?
Over there. She's over there. She's over there. I said I would mention you. See, this is what you do for family.
Yeah. Brenda, I'm sorry she didn't get you a better seat.
We can move over.
See, this is okay. So I guess I've made my point without really making it. But the idea of the show that we wrote was very much based on our families, and when you bring that and the thing is, even if it's not supposedly your family, it is your family. It's always your family. Writers always bring, their experiences. But when you're specifically writing about family, I think it's a really rich stew. You know, you get people in a room and there's just endless material, and I think you're right, Phil. I mean, it is, when you look at all of the shows, I see so much, even these procedural shows, and in recent years more, have emphasized they're always a family. The relationships are more emphasized, and I think that's wonderful. It humanizes the show, and it makes the people real, and, you know, television is a very unique medium. It's very personal.
How do you run your writers' rooms? Do you encourage your writers to bring stories about their own families? Is that where you get your ideas from?
That was the job. If you worked for me, your job was to go home, get in a fight with your wife, come back in and tell me about it.
That's right. I always told writers to read a couple of papers a day. We had, for those who didn't get the New York Times or something, we had it in the office. And pay attention to their kids and their mates and their families and the neighborhoods and the problems of the moment in those neighborhoods and the larger neighborhoods, the country, and so forth. And that's what we came in and, you know, somebody walks in on writing on Good Times and says, did you see this article about hypertension in black males? It's on the rise, and it's way above their white counterparts. Well, John Amos, that's a great subject for a story. And then you find, you do the show, and you find there were tens of thousands of, or thousands of telephone calls across the country from black families who were interested in the subject and wanted more information. When you went into reruns, the network had taken, I don't think they gave up commercial time, but they took some of the time out of the show and had advisement at the end of the show, so people had an answer to the question about where they could find more information. So how did I get there?
I was asking about how you ran your writer's room.
I'm sorry?
I was asking about how you ran your writer's room.
Well, that it started with read a newspaper, pay a lot of attention to your family, let's come in and talk about what's happening in our lives. That's the way Phil, from what he said, ran his.
That's how I learned from you and Carl Reiner. Carl Reiner said, what happened at your house this weekend? That's how he did the Van Dyke show. I thought this show is we could use that methodology. We also made sure, this is no small thing, that we went home at a reasonable hour, because that's where the stories were coming from. You can't write about real life unless you have one. Right?
That's absolutely true. Like, you can't write about, otherwise your stories are going to be about like the Xerox machine.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And there's no Diet Coke left in the fridge. Right. Like, it's so boring. You need to experience
Writers are boring.
But it's also, you know, from growing on Fresh Off the Boat, you know, so much of it is writers coming into the room with their own experience and their family's experience, because we're trying to tell sort of the immigrant story, you know, when your parents are not born here and you are born here, what does that feel like to be that sort of bridge generation between the outside world and the world in your house? And there's so many, you know, our writers we have so many different backgrounds, so many different experiences, but it's amazing how many things are universal once you break it down to that level. Like, the more specific you get, the more universal it is. And for us, like, that's everything. You know, that's all the stories.
How many Asian writers are on the show, on staff?
I think there's 14 writers.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah. And, you know, some of them are part-time. Out of 14, I think there's about 5 or 6. Korean, Vietnamese, Chinese, Taiwanese, you know, all different kinds of cultures.
You know, that's enough.
Well, that was going to be my next question. How do you staff your writer's room? Do you look for diversity? I mean, I would say, I'd ask all of you this question. Do you look for diversity?
I don't care if you're white, black, Asian, female, as long as you write like an old Jew.
Equal opportunity.
And it's amazing how many do.
I'll just say one thing that I do like in a writer's room, whether I'm staffing it or whether I'm just part of the room, is I like a diversity of ages in the room. And Because coming up, I do remember when I was one of the young ones, there would be a whole, sort of a bell curve. Well, not really a bell. I guess it would go and then just drop off very sharply.
People died.
Then people would die. Right. So it's not really a bell. It's really, but it was wonderful because I think it really enriched the writing on the show. It gave it a kind of depth and perspective. To be honest, that sometimes I think I might miss a little in today's programming. I think it's really important to have intergenerational work, particularly in comedy too. I think in all aspects, but in comedy, comedy's I'm not going to philosophize on comedy with Norman Lear here, but it's a very ephemeral thing, and I do believe that to come out of that kind of mix makes it stronger and more powerful in a way I can't really quite define. And it also makes more interesting stories in the room, frankly. And people get to learn about things that happened before they were born, which I think is always fun. So.
For our show, because I'm not gay, but our main character is, it was important that we fill out our room with gay people so that we can make that experience as authentic as possible. And getting back to your point of how do you staff your show, we wanted those people that had no shame and weren't afraid of telling those awful, wonderful, embarrassing stories, especially as it pertained to being gay and coming out. I think we've found that balance in all of our gay writers and our straight writers. There is a universality to being a teenager and having life experiences that are embarrassing. And truly, I think that's where the funniest moments come in a show, are those really awful, embarrassing moments that you now as an adult have perspective on, and you feel okay about sharing them with millions of people out in the world.
All of your words are precious, of course, but do you ever let your cast into the writer's room?
Oh, God, no. No, yeah, of course. It's so crazy on a single cam because we are making a little movie every week, so the hours are nuts. But, if they're always invited to come in and sort of see what we're working on and stuff like that. I feel like transparency is the best thing. There's no reason to hold anything because everyone's on the same page. We're all in the same boat. We're all in the same family. We're all trying to make the best show we can. I don't know. What do you guys do?
Depends on the actor.
That's real.
Right? I could show you some. You don't want them in the room. Any room.
I don't know about in the room all the time, but it's not. When Brenda and I were doing State of Grace, it was a while ago, but we tried to have somewhat of an open door policy, and that was nice. But at some point, you do have to shut the door, I think, because the work is different. But I think everyone needs to feel part of the process sometimes.
And also the actor, they're the ones that have to understand what they're saying, how they're playing something, and so you do have to have an open dialogue with them and let them feel like they can come to you and share their thoughts, and then sort of put that through your filter and give it back to them.
I think among the various ethnicities, and it's the patina that changes, but we're all kids and parents and brothers or sisters or uncles or aunts or nieces or nephews. We share the same basic human conditions. And I think my bumper sticker reads, "Just another version of you." And I think we are all just versions of each other. So working with the African American families that we did those years ago, don't you find that they're in a show like you're doing now, fresh off the boat, that I don't know the show as well as I wish I did, so I could talk about this, but
I'll get you all the episodes.
But don't you find that those people, the Asian people who are representing their people for the world, have a sense of responsibility about what the stories are and what they're playing and everything else, because they're representing something that hasn't existed on television before.
Absolutely.
And it's weighty.
Yeah. I mean, it's that thing, representation is everything. And we did an episode this year where the father, played by Randall Park, gets an opportunity to be on television, and he almost has a meltdown because of the burden of representation. He's trying to be everything to all people,
Right.
and he forgets who he is. And the truth is, you can't be everything to all people. You can be true to what you're trying to say, and hopefully other people relate to it and find a common ground. But you know, when there's only one of anything, it's almost impossible to bear that
Right.
weight. And what you hope for is, in your success, other shows will come, and more people will get opportunities that they never got before. And I think you're seeing that now, you know, and I think because of shows like yours, and because of what you guys have sort of, you know, set the table, it took a long time to get where we are for some reason. You know, we sort of went into that, like, you know, valley. We went from a peak into a valley, and now hopefully we're coming out of it. Mm-hmm. And I think it's all important, you know.
I'm curious, what shows, other than your own, of course, are you guys watching now? What shows do you think are doing well in comedy?
I love Broad City. I think it's an amazing show. I think those girls are telling their own story, and you know, they truly just are just trying to be different and interesting and original, which I love.
I really love what Blackish is doing. I think
Yeah.
it's very funny. It's also got such a strong message. It's talking about things that are happening in the world. You know, that the Hope episode that they did about the police brutality, while not the funniest episode, was so moving to me, and it really. I remember coming back to the room and being like, guys, that show is about something so meaningful that I want to do more of that, and while also being funny. It's a really tricky balance to do do a show about something and also have it be funny. And I think Blackish does that really, really well.
And Carmichael is doing
Absolutely.
that too.
Yeah.
And there's another show, it's only been on, I don't know how many, 13 or so, or maybe 20 episodes. I'll Have What Phil's Having.
I can't imagine who's making that.
Yeah. But it's really daring as hell.
I hear it's very explicit, so.
Phil, what about you? What are you watching?
I just blasted through a show. Did you guys watch Horace and Pete?
No.
I just got the DVD.
What?
Watch it. You know what I'm talking about?
No.
So Louis C.K., with his own money, put together a show that he sells on his website. And it's extraordinary. It harkens back to Playhouse 90. It's filmed multicam without an audience. So it's silent. He wants it silent. And it's almost like Eugene O'Neill. It's extraordinary. There's moments of humor, but it's pretty dark.
Who is he writing? Who's writing?
He wrote and directed and stars in these 10 episodes, and you've never seen anything like it. It's such a ballsy, big swing. I can't say enough about it.
Let's do that this afternoon.
Yes.
Well, I'll come to your room and watch Horace and Pete.
But it's quality. It's quality stuff. I haven't seen anything like it. So I recommend that. That's
What's it called, Phil?
Horace and Pete.
Horace and Pete.
It's amazing.
And
I haven't even heard
and
about
a
it.
cast like you can't believe.
Steve Buscemi, Edie Falco.
You guys, who saw it here? Anybody? Am I lying? You liked it? Yeah, it's good, right? Yeah, good for you.
What's it on?
It's on his website. Do you get the Emmy screeners?
Yes.
Then you got the DVDs for free. You win again.
My house is sinking under the weight of those.
It's really stupid how many we get.
Pretty
All
much.
we need is a link now, right? But they insist on sending boxes and boxes of the landfill waste that this is.
That's another panel.
No, I'm going now on this.
Well, what about you? What are you watching?
Well,
Hollis?
I still appreciate Transparent, and I have to admit I have not caught up with the second season. However, I thought it was a really sort of a groundbreaking show with fantastic performances and edgy, and I split my time between LA and the Bay Area, so I'm kind of addicted to Silicon Valley. It's
I love that too.
Oh,
I think it's a great
Funny.
ensemble cast.
Yeah,
I think
really
the
good.
writing is very sharp. Yeah,
a good
it's
family,
finely
right?
observed.
That's a
Yeah.
family, those guys.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Remember that bit with the English bulldog? Does anybody remember
Yes, I do.
that? That killed me.
Small.
That was so funny.
Yes, they have those very small, finely observed moments, and
How
living
about
in the
bit
Bay
with the
Area.
horse.
But you know what? That was not so good.
That was crazy.
We can't talk about that
What am I
here.
watching? What am I watching? Why am I excited?
Also, Veep is a great show too.
Yes.
Veep is killing it this year, last year.
It's tight writing.
How did you all come up with the ideas for your shows?
Oh my God.
How does it? I mean, you know, in general, how does an idea spark for you?
You watch Norman shows and then you rip it off.
Okay, I'll do this quickly, and then I'll let the rest of the panel know. So Brenda, Lily, and I did a show. We're having a reunion here. It was 15 years ago, and we basically sat down and and compared our life stories and smushed them together. So she's from the South and went to a Catholic high school where apparently there was a girl that her best friend who was Jewish, but why was she at this high school? And she played Mary every year in the play, and I was like, I think it's true. It's all true. And I said, I think that's a show. She says that she thought it was a show. So we argued about that, and then we sort of sold it. We just basically, there was something we wanted to look at our childhood too, and more seriously, we wanted to do a coming of age show about two girls coming of age, because we were seeing a lot of boys coming of age, and we thought that the girls coming of age was as fun and adventurous and multi-dimensional as boys, and so anyway, that's how we did it. It was very autobiographical.
I just think, every year when you're working in television and you're working on other people's shows and you're coming up, you always hear like what the thing is they want in terms of development. It's like, this year we want, 2 girls living on a ranch. It's like, or whatever, and it changes every year. Then forget that. Next year we want a doctor show and what this and that. And I think as young writers, the pressure to conform to what people want or what the industry wants is really intense. And I think once you sort of break out of that and decide, you know what, I'm just going to write what I want to see, stories that I want to tell, things that have happened to me or happened to friends of mine, that's when you start to make really good and true television that resonates with people. Like, I guarantee, Louis C.K. wasn't like, what do people want? Let me do Horace and Pete. Like, he decided he wanted to do this kind of show. And I think when you sort of approach it from a place of reality and authenticity, and you break away from the idea of trying to fit into that box, that's where the real sort of material starts to come from, whatever that means for you, whether it's workplace, family, kids, parents, friends living in the city, whatever,
You always hear, write what you know, and it's really true. I mean, you want to be able to, day in and day out for weeks, hopefully months, and then years at a time, relate to this thing that you're writing. Otherwise, it's going to be a struggle. And so for us, we all have families, and they're all crazy, and so that's what we knew. And I've been on shows where you don't know, you can't relate to that, and it's very, very difficult. I mean, you really have to be able to sort of put everything that's in here out there, and so I think that's really important.
And that's what I think is tricky with comedy, when you get into the high concept, like clearly that pitch sold in the room, but how do you sustain it? Because comedy is all character. So it's like they're high schoolers, but they're also vampires. It's like, all right, okay.
You're a slave to that premise every week.
Exactly. Then you're like, now we're doing a vampire show. Like, what is this show? How do we tell this? What are the stories here?
Yeah, you pitch a show, a guy and his family live across the street from his parents. Nobody's jumping up and down. Wow, that's a sexy idea. You gotta have that show. But that's the show that can stay on for 9 years because there's an infinite number of real life possible situations. You make them from Mars, and suddenly now you have to make the Mars jokes every week, and that gets tired.
Yes, and it did get. And why was the time right for a remake of One Day at a Time?
I didn't hear the
Sorry,
question.
why was the time right for a remake of One Day at a Time?
That came about because young associate Brent Miller, who's here, was in conversation with an agent somewhere, and they said somehow the conversation turned to 3 generations of Latino women, and we settled as a result of Gloria Collette, who is herself a Cuban American, decided that Latino would be Cuban, and that's how we got to that. But I was thinking as you were talking, there was another way our shows, some of our shows came about. Maud was a wonderful show. B. Arthur was, thanks. B. Arthur, by the way, made me laugh in corners of my physical being I didn't even know existed. But there was a wonderful actress playing Florida, her maid, and it occurred to us she would be the center of a show. So we introduced John Amos as her husband on an episode of Maud. By the time the show was off the air, when it first appeared, the network was calling us saying, hey, there's a show in those 2 people. So that happened a lot. I always thought the expression for me wasn't spin-off, it was you had an actor in the bush leagues who should be in the majors. And they were proving themselves week after week in smaller roles. And it was just, wouldn't it be great? And as a consequence, she's also happened to be black. Now we were suddenly talking about a black family. I mean, it grew out of that kind of desire to see actors fill their own silhouettes.
Phil, did they ever ask for a Raymond spinoff? I would imagine that they would be all over that.
You would think.
Still waiting for the phone call?
Norman seems to be doing well at Netflix. You should call them and see.
We had an idea. It was from the moment we introduced Amy's family, the brother's wife's family. We cast Fred Willard, Georgia Engel, and Chris Elliott as her brother. Yes. That first table reading where we met them, I think in season 7, I went from the table reading to the phone to call Les Moonves at CBS and say, I think I have a spinoff. I think these are the... And then after the show was over, some of the writers and I thought this is an obvious idea. Very simply, the brother now moves to Pennsylvania and becomes, he can't be a cop anymore, so he gets a job at Fred Willard as a vice principal in a junior high, and he gets a job as the gym teacher at the junior high, living with this family now, Georgia Engel, on one condition, that his ne'er-do-well son, Chris Elliott, is his assistant gym teacher. Sounds good to me. They would not give us more than a pilot episode. Well, I said, well, we need a guarantee because all these writers now, because they worked on Raymond, they're all getting these deals. And so they can't just chuck this money to do a pilot, right? They have families, they have to make a living. They said, we won't give you more than that. And what happened was they did give a 13-episode commitment to a show where the entire cast was under 30. They were in their 20s. This cast, everyone was over 40.
That's a big thing.
Okay.
So
that's what happened to that spin-off.
And what happened to that other show?
Dead. Dead in 3 episodes. See? Go with the old people.
What is that about old people?
Go with the
I
old
wrote
people.
a show I love about 5 years ago now, when it occurred to me that one Betty White doth not a demographic make. And so ask me the title of the show. Oh, thank you. Guess who died? And it's about people from 65 up in a retirement home, living full lives with anybody in the world could be calling an uncle, an aunt, a grandmother, a grandfather at one of these homes. So it was full of the opportunity for young people to be a part of it also. It's 5 years. I know the people that needed to read it in order to put it on the air. They all thought it was funny as hell. Nobody wanted the demographic.
I've been trying for years to do a show with older people. Nobody wants it. Yeah.
It's strange too, because Golden Girls is so amazing.
I know.
It's such a great show, and it talk about something that lasts. You could turn on an episode right now, and it's hilarious.
I have to say, there's all these. They talk about this golden age of you can sell a show. Everyone needs content, but what I find when I go and pitch is like, they seem like they all want the same demographic. They all want to get younger and younger. They want to get younger and hipper and sexier, and so it feels like 500 branches of the same company.
And yet, millennials aren't watching on television, so.
Yeah, so why are you bothering me with that? But there can be some programming for other people, can't there?
It's true. It does seem that, if there are definite gaps in programming. There are programs that there are huge swaths of the audience that they would like to. I think people want to see themselves on television, and they want to see some representation of their lives, on TV. It's become important. I guess this is the era we live in now, and. There's so many wonderful older actors, too. The casting possibilities of these kinds of shows, which of course I've thought of these too, and tried in my own way to do similar kinds of shows. But the casting opportunities are huge, and I think the audience is there. It's true. If you don't know how to do this, if you guys don't know how to do this, this is depressing.
They still test the show once in a while. It's in syndication, and they test the characters. They want to see how it's scoring so they can sell it some more later. So who tests the best with young people? The grandparents on the show.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I think our best episode dealt with the grandmother coming, played by Frances Conroy, and she was amazing. She was so incredible, and I felt so honored that we had her on the show, and I can't wait to bring her back next season.
I knew if we sat here long enough, we'd come up with an idea for a show. I want to give you guys a chance to ask some questions. I figure you might have some, so raise your hand. Go ahead.
This is primarily for David, but also for everybody. One of the things that I love about you is the way that you satirize religion and faith without being mean, without being respectful. So when you're in the writer's room and you guys are working on your shows, how do you draw that line by being funny but not cruel?
It was our intention from the very beginning to represent all sides. We never wanted to go into it bashing the church. We felt like it was more interesting if we showed this woman, the mother, Martha Plimpton's character, who has a very deep belief in her faith, and that is a lot of people in the world. And even though it's not necessarily mine, I didn't want to diminish that in everyone else. And it also builds good conflict with her son, who also has faith but is conflicted because he's gay, and his faith and his homosexuality aren't in sync with each other. And I thought that it's not just me, but my writing partner Casey Johnson, it was important to represent all sides so that people that are very religious weren't put off by the show immediately, because we sort of had a bigger message we wanted to put out there, which is that, the world is changing, gay people are everywhere, and, the church's beliefs aren't necessarily in line with what society is, and we kind of felt that if we offended people of faith, we weren't going to even open the dialogue to them, and it was really important not to do that.
Okay.
I was actually going to look for an update on Guess Who Died, because I was lucky enough to be at the live reading you did in Austin back in the fall, and was laughing and crying and enjoyed the whole thing. And I'm certainly not the over 65 demographic, but I absolutely would watch it, and was tweeting that I would watch it. So I was wondering if anything changed since you did the live script reading.
Well, the only thing that's changed is just recently, a couple of weeks ago, The New York Times does these op docs, you know them? They came and one of the women who made the American Masters that's playing later here, another version of you, directed. The Times asked her to direct it. Anyway, we just did an op doc where I was casting those players. So there were a bunch of actors who came in playing the older roles, and it bids fair to sell the show. I mean, it seemed the experience was so good, and I think what they got film-wise was wonderful. And maybe it's going to have a life in that sense, and maybe it'll trigger a sale.
Phil, I liked your doc, the Exporting Raymond. So I'm just curious if you all comment on, the worldwide market and how it's impacting production here, or what your opportunities are. If it's changing.
Well, Netflix is changing that. It's the world's first global network. You make 6 episodes or 13 episodes of a show, and they push a button, and it's on in 190 countries simultaneously, right? So that's kind of incredible. That's changing the world. I don't know if the regular networks here at home can do that. I don't think yet, but they're the new HBO. They're they're the evolution of television.
I found it interesting last year. I learned when our show got picked up and we went to the international upfronts that basically if a broadcast network is going to pick up a show, it's because they've already figured out that it's selling internationally and will make their money back. And I was shocked by that.
Yep. The way movies work too.
Right.
Right,
Exactly.
and always have.
Yeah.
Right? They can sell it to other countries.
And there's always that weird thinking that comedy doesn't translate internationally, but as well as dramas or procedurals or something like that. But
it does.
It does. Yeah.
How many different versions of Raymond are there around the world?
Well, we're in 140 countries just dubbed or subtitled, but then we're in about 6 or 7 countries where, like Exporting Raymond, where the Russians took our scripts and made Everybody Loves Kostya. But there's an Indian version, and there was an Israeli version. There's an Egyptian version where you're watching, and a lady in a burqa comes in the kitchen and starts yelling at Mumtai or whatever his name is. It is something to see. I love it. China is the holy grail. I think that's where you want to end up. A lot of movies. You go see a lot of action movies. This is a little off subject, but you see action movies. They make no sense for you. That's because they're not for you. They're for a Chinese market that don't have the same story needs that we might have. Yeah.
I have a question for Nahnatchka. How do you negotiate the kind of public contention that Eddie Huang has had with the show versus
his what?
His
I
memoir.
don't think there is a negotiation in terms of, what do you mean, how do we address, or how do we make the show?
Yeah, because he has often been critical of it in comparison to his own
Right.
memoir. How does that come into the writer's room, or is that discussed at all because it's a basement of the memoir?
I think that you can't get more personal than somebody's memoir. That is someone writing their life story from their point of view. And for us, it was about sort of understanding where he was coming from, where if it's not that exact story, it's not going to feel real to him. And that's one person's point of view. When you turn something like a memoir or something so personal into a television show, especially for broadcast, for network television, there's going to be a transition, and it's not going to be that exact thing. That exact story exists in the memoir. Once you become a TV show, it becomes a collective. You have writers, you have producers, you have actors, all bringing their own experiences and opinions and everything like that. So in good television, that collective makes the voice better. It lifts it up, and it changes it. And I think that if you embrace the change and you look at it as like a different entity, you know, it was always fictionalized. You know, it's not a documentary, it's not a biopic, it's things that have never happened in real life. You know, we're making some of this up. And it's understandable that he would feel that way. You know, like we've never had our life story turned into a sitcom, and I can't imagine how hard that is, you know?
In the beginning, he was like a little bit upset about it. And like, have you had conversations about him losing his feelings about losing his memoir in your show?
No, I mean, I think he's made it very clear, you know, how he feels, but I think that the thing that he's sort of, you know, what his journey has been is reconciling the idea of, you know, having his memoir taken and turned into something that is fictionalized, that is not his story. And that happens when you have source material and then you turn it into a movie, you turn it into a series, like whatever. It happens often. And I think that the person, but especially a memoir, like it's not fiction, you know, the person who has lived this experience has the hardest time with the transition. It makes only sense, you know?
I'll just add one note to that. The show that State of Grace was very autobiographical and based in large part on my family, the Jewish extended Jewish family, and I was running the show with Brenda, and I felt bad in the room when people would come up with stories having to do with my dad. It's like, I would sit there in the room and go, you don't know my dad. He would not do that. My parents were not like that. And I would think, oh my God, they actually were. And, you know, but I don't want to tell them that. And it's like, oh no, you're on a TV show. This is what you have to do. There's what you're saying rings very true. So I just wanted to chime in. It was it was my own show with Brenda, and I would have these irrational arguments with wonderful writers who were very imaginative, much better than me, and then I'd go back the next thing. Oh, I'm really sorry. I lost it. And we would do the show, and it would be great. So I think it is.
Yeah,
it's a different form. It has to take flight. Yeah. You have to breathe your own life into it. You can't be stuck to the reality. You take the reality. What you explained it much better than I could.
No. But I mean, and I think that the idea of then celebrating what that TV show is and how it speaks to so many people and how so many people can relate to it and let it exist on its own.
Right. It becomes part of.
It becomes something else.
It becomes something else.
Yes, girl.
Okay.
Me and you are going to
Oh, right. We are the backup singers for the existential chorus.
It's become a new American TV family. Yes. She brings it back to the theme that we started on an hour ago. So anyway, unfortunately we've got to end it there, but thank you all so much for coming. Thanks to everybody. Thanks to our panelists.
Thank you.